Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I talk with Spinal Energetics creator, Dr. Sarah Jane Perri. Dr. Sarah Jane is a renowned teacher and practitioner with qualifications in psychology, chiropractic, Buddhism, acupuncture, and more. Her expertise in psychology, consciousness, cross-cultural awareness, trauma, energetics, and the human body have gained her thousands of clients from all walks of life, including therapists, teachers, doctors, scientists, athletes, CEOs, and celebrities. She brings a multi-faceted, energetic, and highly practical approach through utilising the latest techniques and working with evidence-based framework. She shares her wisdom through various speaking engagements, workshops, trainings, and private and group sessions. In this week's episode, expect to learn about the importance of science and spirituality coming together, how your energy can show up in your body, the downside of doing a lot of work, how many of us have blocked energy, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we start this week's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the Life by Design Mastermind. The Life by Design Mastermind is the mastermind for go-getters and high achievers who are looking to create a more successful, fulfilling, and balanced life by design. If you're serious about transforming your life, achieving your goals, and living a life on your terms, then the Life by Design is your golden ticket. Head over to the show notes and click on the link for more details about the program.
The Reddit thread.
Doctor, you've caught me off. I'm gonna leave this in here just because why not? Dr. Sarah Jane Perri, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy already in the last 10 minutes. So hopefully
that's the first time in 126 episodes I've absolutely sprayed the intro. People are going to enjoy it though, because it's something different.
We're keeping everyone on their toes and we're showing, even the best make mistakes.
I know, just the raw and the real. There's lots that we can talk about today, which I'm excited to talk about, depending where we go, based on the first 10 minutes off air. Today could go anywhere, which is exciting. Can you give the guys a 60 to 90 second spiel of who you are and what's got you to where you are today?
Sure. I'm Sarah Jane. I'm a chiropractor and also the founder of a technique you may or may not have heard of called Spinal Energetics. It's a modality that's basically a bridge between the West and the East and has been influenced by, my own healing journey, as well as my education in psychology, Buddhism, and chiro as well. And Network Spinal Chiro was a large influence, which was founded by Donnie Epstein, as well as Reiki and inner dance and some other modalities too. Others you may not have heard of, such as alpha alignment and things like that, and really just works on the notion that the body really does keep track of every experience that we go through in our emotions. And this is a modality that basically talks to the body.
That's quite like short, sharp and shiny. Yeah. Do you know what's interesting about your work is if someone hasn't experienced it, so I've spent a lot of time working with energy healers, therapists, not sure what you kind of categorize them. But if you were to try and explain energy work to the average everyday punter, it's fucking hard to explain. And even with kinesiologists and different energy workers, I'm like, I can't even find simple language for it. Just go and experience it. How do you speak to it in really simple terms that someone who's never experienced it could grasp?
Yeah, look, it is a challenge that most people do face with energy because it's essentially a topic that people either believe in or don't believe in. So other modalities, they're not necessarily trying to change your belief system or your perceptions, whereas energy, people are either like, I believe in that, or that's possible, or I don't believe in it. So you're already at a different foot in terms of the conversation. Osho kind of described it well. He's got a book about the esoteric of psychology. And he talks about trying to actually utilize words in a way to describe the divine and how difficult it is, and it actually does an injustice to the esoteric. So that's also why I think we struggle to kind of describe it. But I always adapt to the description based on the person in front of me. So if someone's just an everyday person, you've got to speak to the reason why they're there. So for example, if they're there because they've had pain in the physical body for however long and they've tried everything and it hasn't worked, then you can explain to them that there's something going on that they haven't necessarily looked at yet, most likely the energetic field. And let's have a look at this and see what happens. And you'll notice a difference pretty quickly and tangibly if this is something that's going to work for you. And they usually do notice something pretty quickly. And from that feeling, that tangibility, that's when they're believers, for a lack of better word. But they need something tangible for them to understand. It's kind of like saying gravity exists, but you've never really felt it, so it has to be a concept that's tangible, but no one really listens too much to the words initially. They've got to have an experience. And so that's why I kind of keep it pretty sharp and simple.
It's it kind of makes sense, I guess, but you speak to the pain in the physical body, which is literally something I'm working through at the moment with mine. I've done all the physical treatments that you could possibly think of, which is where most people turn to.
Yeah.
What happened from a history point of view that made the physical ailment, and maybe it's the science element because you can point to it, more like the first point of call as opposed to like energetics or spiritual or even mental? Like if we've got a problem, we go to the masseuse, the chiro, the physio, the osteo, but we don't think beyond, if we're talking about the 5 bodies, and you might have a different kind of analogy for that, but like we always go to the physical body first as opposed to the energetic, mental, emotional, spiritual. Like what's the history that made us go there first? Do you know?
I'm not sure what their specific history is in the West. In the East, it's not as so separate as we are here in the West. So for someone like in India, for example, looking at the energetic system is something that they would just do within their way of being, and everyone in their country would look at that. It's just part of their culture, part of their belief system, part of their spirituality. It's just they're one with that aspect. Whereas here in the West, we're far more tangible of what's real, what's realistic, what's reality, what can we touch, what can we grasp, what can be proven. And the physical pain is usually that symptom that gets our attention as well, because of the way we live our lives. We're very busy, so we usually don't have that subtlety connection within ourselves to even hear it or see it initially, or if we do, we don't really pay attention to it until it actually affects our day-to-day living. And because it's a physical pain, we've kind of been taught that you address it then physically, because physical equals physical. So we're starting to grasp the idea that really it happens in the energetic field first and then becomes a physical issue. Most people think it's physical and then goes into the field, but it's actually the opposite of that. It occurs in the field first and then becomes a physical manifestation. And Dr. Joe Dispenza talks quite a little bit about that as well. And, he's someone who's really a great ambassador for energy. He speaks about it in a very plain and simple way. He bases his work on science and really is trying to get more evidence out there so that this becomes, I guess, more accepted in our world.
Do you think part of that division between like the physical and the energetic is kind of to what you speak? Like you can't necessarily measure a lot of this stuff that we've spoken about. And it's really that connection point between, I guess, spirituality and science, which my understanding is Joe's been kind of at the forefront of trying to bring those two together. Is that what you think's at the core of this? Is, people haven't been able to measure, quote unquote, some of these things for so long that we chose the physical body and the science as opposed to spirituality and the potential of other options?
I think it's one of the reasons. Another reason can be our religious background as well. So, still to this day, I get comments on my reels that are associating it with, bad spirits or the devil, or it's not godly, so it's there's belief systems around the religion and what we've been exposed to in terms of work that looks similar. So, for example, people will say, this looks like an exorcism, because the only time that they've ever been exposed to a movement that seems unconsciously involuntary is on like things like horror movies in Australia, for example, or America, like the exorcism. So it's what we've been exposed to. There's fear around it because it's unknown. And again, we are in this society where I get asked constantly, but where's the evidence? Where's the science? And what people don't realize is the science usually comes after. So this will definitely be, something that I think is looked at in the next 10 years. I think energy medicine will be something that's coming. Albert Einstein always said that as well, that the future of medicine is in energy, is in frequency. So I think we will get to that point, but people need to realize there needs to be enough interest in this field of work before people are going to start doing studies on it. But I've got no doubt that if there was to be one, just like what Joe does, stool samples, blood work, mouth swabs, there would definitely be a change in the physiology. I've only got subjective experience at this point, but I've got a long time of subjective experience, and that comes first before the objective can come. So hopefully, I'm always open to that idea in the future.
I don't know much about your background, but what got you into energetics. I'm guessing, generally speaking, when someone's super passionate about it, there's some kind of pain or there's some kind of history. It's not an accident that they fell across this.
No, there never is. The energy component was an accident, I must admit. If you told me that I'd be someone working with energy specifically, 15 years ago, I would have said no, probably not, which is also why I have understanding as to why people are skeptical around it. I don't get offended by that questioning like some people think I would. I actually welcome it. I think everyone should question, but you need to question from an open mind. But what changed it for me was my own experience, my own traumas that I was going through in my own life. I had experienced psychogenic seizures, which are basically seizuring in the body for a trauma-related issue rather than epileptic seizures. Also, as a child, I was diagnosed with absence epileptic seizures, where I
What's that?
Basically stare into space. And I used to get in trouble at school in about grade 6, and then they realized I was actually having epileptic fits.
What the fuck?
Yeah. So in certain cultures, epilepsy is a real sacred disease. And it's very interesting that I've come to work in this field, because what does it look like, my work? It almost looks like an epileptic seizure.
Yeah.
So they actually find epilepsy a really beautiful disease in, say, countries like the Philippines. And that's because really what epilepsy is too much electricity in the brain, too much energy with nowhere to go. So they look at it as a very interesting, sacred diagnosis, as opposed to how we look at it. And that's why when you connect to the life force or the energy, it represents that seizure activity, because you've got electricity, you've got energy. That's that kind of concept of the East anyway. So I had that. And then I had growing pains, these constant growing pains as a kid. I've got all these documents from my mum taking me to all these pediatricians where I could literally just feel electricity running up and down my legs and in my arms, constant complaining around this. And they just put it down to growing pains. But really, I think as a highly sensitive child that was experiencing things that I couldn't quite understand. What they are exactly, I don't know. And then as I grew older into adolescence, I developed a scoliosis as well, which again is seen as almost a sacred thing. And the reason they see it as sacred in the spiritual context is because basically you have so much energy going up and down your spine that it has nowhere to go and actually curvatures. So basically you're repressed in a way of your spiritual sense, and as a woman specifically, which is why most adolescent females are the ones that develop scoliosis. So again, there's a real interest in why the spine decides to create curvatures in your nervous system from that point in time too. So there was all those kind of things. I also was diagnosed with fibromyalgia at around 21 from a PTSD thing with a boyfriend at the time. And fibromyalgia, it came a couple of years later. And basically that's a pain disorder that has no real physical pain reason behind it. Again, it's considered trauma-based. And I was trying all different things to try and help myself with these things. And I ended up by chance working for a chiropractor who's Dr. Carly Axford, who's come up with her own modality called Spinal Flow. So she's a huge inspiration for me. People think we must be enemies or whatever. No, she's my mentor and was my mentor for years and is the reason I'm a chiro. And she worked differently to me. But yeah, she was a huge inspiration, helped me with my symptoms, and for the first time felt energy move through my system with her and with another chiropractor who was a network spinal chiropractor. And you couldn't deny the feeling. And it was the feeling that I felt when I was a child again, when I thought it was just growing pains. And from then on, that moment, I decided to dedicate my life to what this was. So I went back and studied chiro for another 5 years to be this kind of chiropractor, which is interesting to most people.
So
that was a long-winded answer.
I can't remember the question that I asked you, to be honest, but it's a good one. Oh, that's right. Your history. So the PTSD with the boyfriend's a really interesting one, and how that showed up as fibromyalgia.
Yeah.
What else have you noticed from a personal experience? I'm sure obviously you got thousands of case studies, but from a personal experience, what else has shown up in a injury, ailment, way in which you've helped yourself through energy work? I often refer back to this some of Louise Hay's work that I've found, like I'm really kind of rookie to this, but I found 3 or 4 of my injuries and ailments I could overcome with an understanding of the energetic or the emotional, the mental component. It was like it continues to blow my mind, and I'm so green to this. But from your own personal experience, what else have you noticed you've been able to heal or move through, or things that might have shown up from a energetic and emotional point of view?
Look, spinal energetics as a whole looks at not just the physical symptoms, but we actually have a whole section for each process that's based on the metaphysical or the emotional reasoning behind it as well, which I hadn't seen in chiro. either. So that for me was a strong reason to want to come up with my own modality as well, because I think it's such an important aspect, not just the nerve supply through the vertebra of what organ that works with, but what's the actual meaning of that organ? Why did the body choose that vertebra? All that kind of thing was something I was more interested in. But for me, in terms of my own experience, which I think is always helpful, is for me, I did have an experience. So I had a physical assault to my body. And I knew from then on the way that my body was responding. I had a panic attack. I had no idea what it was. I had to go to hospital. I thought I was having a heart attack because I was only young at the time. My mum took me and they were like, no, this is actually a panic attack. And then from the panic attacks came fibromyalgia later and psychogenic seizures later. And I was already seeing a counsellor at that point in time for PTSD related situations in regards to that. So for me, it was quite an easy, like I had something happen and I had a result of that. And the diagnosis that I had, kind of what they do call psychogenic. And that's basically, you know, a smancy word for them saying we don't know why this is happening. It's kind of idiopathic. We don't know why. It's still a physical pain. For example, fibromyalgia, they can see pain centers lighting up just as if you're actually having true pain. But the treatment of that, even in the West, might be CBT or psychology sessions or EMDR, but also antidepressants like SSRIs. And so there's already an understanding there that there's something to do with the emotional component of the body that's creating a physical ailment. And so for me, in terms of spinal, most of the people that we are seeing are people who are having pain that's not gone away as a result of doing the traditional physical things, which is probably a precursor in us to know that it's not a physical issue that's creating it. And so we are still a last resort for a lot of people. There's also a lot of curious people where the first resort, depending on your belief systems, again, and your perceptions of your own health. But still, for a lot of people, you know, day-to-day people, I was always a last resort. And most of it was word of mouth, if I'm honest. She's helped me with this. I don't know how it works. I don't understand, but I don't care because I don't have the pain anymore. And that's kind of where it starts still, if I am honest. It's changing, but, you know, for most of the population, as long as they're not in pain anymore, they're happy. And then, but what they don't realize is with this work, we start to align with them with who they really are as well. And so they start wanting to understand it more as time goes on, and they start wanting to answer those questions and have a more aligned life so that it doesn't essentially happen again. But it's not educated through the mouth. It's educated almost through a remembering of who they are through the work.
If someone was to look at your social media who's new to this game and sees you doing these things with your hands and seeing clients' bodies jump up and move, like how do you, again, if we were to simplify that, because that looks fucking wild to someone who hasn't experienced it, but how would you explain what's going on there?
Well, for example, if I was to do what I'm doing to someone who was dead, nothing would happen, number one. So what am I working with? What does a dead person not have that a live person has? Life force. What's life force? Our innate intelligence, from my chiro understanding. What's innate intelligence? It's energy. So that's essentially what we're working with. We're facilitating the client's innate intelligence. So we separate that from prana, we separate that from chi, we separate that from kundalini, just because that's our philosophy. All right, but there's different belief systems around all that as well. But this modality is what my understanding of it is, and that's why it's my modality, you know. But everyone's got their own version. So you take what you will and you leave other things that don't resonate with you, and that's okay. But what are we actually doing? Look, I've been doing this work I've been out of chiro school for 7 years now, but I've been involved in chiro and this kind of understanding of energy work for a longer period of time. I think since 2008 was when I first was exposed to it. So I've been doing this a long time, and it still astonishes me. And I still, as much as I try to understand it rationally and conventionally, again, like at the start of our conversation, it's really, really hard for me to say what I think we're actually specifically doing. It is subjective, but my belief is that we're working with that person's life force, their innate intelligence, their soul, and that's what we're working with. And it's something we've forgotten in the West. You know, there's other philosophies and other religions where moving energy is just part of their life, and it's not as odd, it's not as strange as what it looks like here. Probably the only thing I can compare it to for what we've seen is, did you go away?
No, I've still got you.
Someone's calling, sorry. Let's decline them.
Yeah, now's not the time.
There you are. And so for me, seeing like animals in the wild have a shake it off response, for example, or other people in the West, like there's a physio, David Bocelli, who came up with
TRE.
Yeah, trauma responses, which in a sense is inducing through the psoas, the hip flexors, emotional trauma through the physicality and through a shake it off response. And so those things are kind of a step before the work that we're doing that people can kind of understand and tangibly go, okay, there is something that's happening in the body involuntarily that's a result of my emotions, but it's having a physical outlet and it's through a movement that I'm not in control of. And that's also something that scares people about the work. What if they're not in control? What if something comes up that they can't stop? Because essentially, 5% of us is conscious and the other 95% is unconscious. And that's the part we're working with, because, we have a lot of clients who have seen psychologists for many years and they've had help and assistance, but they're still in that same loop. Their body is still in that time frame of when the trauma happened. And so this work's about letting the body recalibrate, letting the body integrate that experience, and not just the mental, but the emotional, the physical. And again, it's that idea that they're all interconnected. They're not separate. Like we're not as bad as we used to be. Meditation and ice baths and breath work and all that kind of things really kind of becoming something that's bridging a bit of that gap. People are willing to look at that, but my work's still quite left of field to that. The local businesses have me come in at times, but I haven't had the big calls from big corporations bringing me in just yet, because it's still that little bit too left of field for them, I'd imagine.
I would think the fact that you've got chiro behind you, and this is literally just such an out-of-date system, but anyway, the fact that you have that behind you in some people's eyes gives you validity, as opposed to just having spinal energetics and being just completely woo. My guess.
A little bit. It gives me credibility, but chiro is not necessarily looked on favorably in Australia.
Really?
No, there's a lot of disrespect towards chiropractors. Yeah, definitely. I can't say that there's been many times when I've said I'm a chiropractor from trade background that people are like, oh, that's amazing. A lot of people go, oh, you're not a real doctor then. Or, most people in society would say that, but in other circles, we have such a great positive interaction with people who have seen a chiropractor themselves. So most people who have a chiropractor, they have a very positive experience. And it's usually people who haven't seen a chiropractor who have that other opinion. And that's usually the first thing I ask, like, oh, who's your chiropractor then? That's a strange view on chiropractic. And then they say they've never seen one. So, it's that stigma of kind of the used car salesman in the medical, like you're not a real medical doctors. Don't value your opinion, you're a quack or whatever. So that's still quite evident in Australia, definitely. But in terms of getting, my foot in the door in other ways, it wasn't a weekend course that I did in Reiki and now I've come up with this modality. I've studied at university level for over a decade. And so I think my degree within psychology and philosophy, applied science, clinical science, and then my postgraduate study in Buddhism does help tick boxes for the West a little bit more than nothing. But I would say still to a lot of people, it's not a real, something that they don't value very much still, if I'm honest.
Isn't it wild? I think you're probably in a similar position to me where you do life so differently, or you're in a pocket of thinking or of doing that. I can't imagine anyone in my world, not thinking chiro is real. Just like the majority of people in my world know the benefits and the upside of psychedelic, whereas the large population think you're going to die if you do psychedelic. Do you know what I mean? Like it's so far removed from the way that I live now that I can't even conceptualize the thought that chiro is not real.
I know, like it's for me very similar to you. And I've been in this space, and the people I have in my space are very open-minded people that would share similar values and opinions and perceptions to myself. But if we look at the greater whole of the population, unfortunately, we are a minority in that. Only 10% of the population, in terms of the last study, see a chiropractor. That's already a very low amount of the population. So I think, who you choose to surround yourself with is a beautiful thing. And that's why, I think my business has been somewhat successful, is because I've got those people, our people, but then also the ability for the normal everyday person who maybe doesn't consider themselves spiritual get results from this work. So whether they're spiritual or not, there's something where they've gone, I believe in this now. and they're my best advocates for my work. They spread it like wildfire, because if, Tom down the street, who's a concreter, had a huge, change in his symptoms, and they know that this isn't something he would normally do, and then he's saying, no, you need to go try this. That's a different experience to say you or I may be suggesting it to someone, because they can tell that that's our current belief system or our value.
When it comes, because obviously you teach a lot of people this skill now, or this modality, how much do you think of energy work is given and how much of it's grown? So obviously there's, whether it's psychics, clairvoyants, like some of these people have just got a natural knack. Like, I don't even know if some of that shit can be taught. You either got it or you don't. Is there an element of that with this skill set? Like, for example, I did a course called Spinal, which you're aware of.
Yeah.
And if for the first, no, I actually lied, not the first time, but I have never felt such a separation between me and the rest of the people. I was like, you guys have got some fucking skill in terms of picking up energy that I just had no idea. And I was very much in my head at that stage. I now have a deeper understanding of it. But is there an element when it comes to the skill that you're teaching that is innate in these people and can be kind of pulled upon?
Yes and no. Right. So I think there is some people have more of a natural ability, like say Michael Jordan, for example. He was an exceptional basketballer, but he had to still train and practice. He might have had a natural incline towards basketball, but if he didn't practice and didn't dedicate his whole life to it and master that skill, he wouldn't have been Michael Jordan. But it's also, there's a lot of basketball players out there, so it's a teachable skill. You can teach, basketball to people, but not everyone's going to necessarily be as natural at it as Michael Jordan, but even Michael Jordan still has to work exceptionally hard at that. So I believe that it is a skill set that can be taught, or I wouldn't be teaching it. And I believe even people like yourself who do feel like at some point that they can't feel energy, or they're at more of a beginner's level, I think it is a skill set that we can learn and adapt, and through consistent training and a long time of consistent training and practice, you can get to a place where you can be a great facilitator. And, Robert Greene's got a book on mastery out there, which I recommend everyone read, which is about really having reverence for it though as well. The problem I see more so in the energetic space is people doing it for a year or two and then thinking they're in a position to teach it. That's probably more my issue. There's no reverence to it. There's no honor to it anymore. People think I've done the work in a year now or 2 years now, I can create my own energy healing modality, and everyone wants to have their own modality. Whereas, when I was a chiropractor, for instance, you were so proud to be like a network spinal chiropractor and share that. You didn't have to be the founder, and you spent a long time within that work and within that frame of dedication to it. So I would say it's more, that's my issue with the work now is, and it sounds kind of, a bit hypocritical considering I have my own modality, but it does seem like there's an increase in that with energy where they don't have as much reverence for it, and they just think everyone can learn it and see it and do it and teach it. And that's probably more of a problem I have at the moment.
Would you say, based on your experience, that females are more sensitive to this kind of work, generally speaking, than males?
It's hard for me to say, honestly, because I would still say I get a lot more females wanting to do this work than I do males. So I'd say, 80 to 90% of our classes are females still. We have about usually 2 token men in the background who come and join. And, my marketing is still quite feminine. I'm also a female teacher, so I think that changes the dynamic a little bit as well. But with the men that come, I've seen really amazing skill set in them. So it's hard to say because I do get mainly women, but I would say there's an intuition or a gut feeling that women have that may become a little bit more natural, that's not, they kind of know where to go at times without really knowing why they know to go there. But men really have another skill set about making people feel safe and setting that tone in the session and really holding space well. So yeah, it's hard for me to answer that because there is such a bias with females still in this space.
How does this show up for you? Obviously, there's a deep level of attunement to energy. How does this show up for you in your private life? Like, what do you notice over I think you said a 10-year period? What have you noticed in terms of how you move through the world with a deeper awareness and attunement to energy?
There's positives and negatives, I guess you could say. I am in a place now with the skill that I can, go to work or teach, and I kind of turn my volume up to be at that level. And then when I go home, I kind of turn that volume down. But I definitely spend a lot more time alone than probably most people would. I don't have much interest in social activities too much unless there were certain people. My friendship group's quite tight and I'm quite predictable. I'm usually at home in front of my fire having a cup of tea or a bath. That's really where you can find me, or at work. So, and with my pets at home. So I can be a little anti-social and just prefer my own company, which I need to work on probably a little bit more. But it's kind of made me more, I don't know, I wouldn't say I'm an introvert as such, but I'm an extroverted introvert. I still need a lot of time to recharge than maybe most other people do.
I resonate with this deeply. I'm coming out the other side of that antisocial.
Yeah.
I haven't got language for why it happened. I mean, there's plenty of my own personal stuff that I need to move through. But I think I don't know. I mean, my partner's super attuned to energy, and even for her, she's mindful if I go to a game of footy or whatever, let's say I go to the MCG, she's like, think about all the energy. And I'm like, well, I'm going to the footy. There's not much I can do, but it is an interesting thing. So the antisocial component for you, is it that you can't be fucked with people? Is it that you don't want to pick up their energy? Is it that it drains you? Is it what stimulated that movement? Probably a combination of all, but
combination, but probably more so because what I really like in life is having meaningful, purposeful kind of conversations. And I just found with most people, that's not what you're having, at a local party. They're normally very superficial, surface level questions. And I think my tolerance has gotten less for that as I've gotten a bit older, probably, number one. And I just want to be able to be who I am and be accepted for who I am. So, I'm quite open and honest about what I do. And, it just comes at a different understanding, a different level of understanding for some people. Then also more so just getting overwhelmed by the amount of energy that could be there. So going to a concert, for example, I'll always have in the back of my mind, there's lights, there's sound, there's lots of people. That can be overwhelming for me, where I can get I don't want to say anxiety is not the right word, but almost sensory overwhelm. So I would start hearing it all too much. And then I can't my brain almost can't differentiate how much sensory overload to allow him. It just all comes, and that's not necessarily a nice feeling for me. So I don't tend to I get nervous of that feeling. And then also probably what I like to do has changed. I don't mind a few social activities here and there, but I get tired from them quite easily. And then I need to come home and be by myself. Whereas if I'm just home alone, reading a book, with my dog, having a nice tea, I just really like the simple things now in life as well. But it's also tricky because I can think I've done all this work, and then you can put me in a social situation and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm getting, and maybe I haven't done as much work on that as possible because I've just resorted to that. But I come from a Vipassana meditation background as well, where I did quite a few of those, and that kind of changed me a little bit after doing those too, where I don't meditate much at all anymore, which is something I do want to get back into. But I went a bit antisocial after those as well, went a bit weird. So in a good way.
I've done two of them. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Where'd you do them? Did you do them in Melbourne?
Yeah, I did them at Worrall-Thompson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What'd you find the hardest about Vipassana?
I actually love Vipassana. So probably the hardest, I was camping. I never camped before, in 10 days in this little tent. What I enjoyed the most was not having to talk, not having to look at anyone. Just the day-to-day routine was so helpful for me as well, just knowing what I did every day. Probably the start was a little bit more challenging just because I hadn't sat and meditated for that long. So actually probably the hardest part was my physical body's response to sitting for as long as I was. But I mentally, after about day 3, it was quite, not easy, but I didn't find that as hard as, I think I'd done quite a lot of trauma work and I knew what was going to come up. So I wasn't shocked by anything that did, but the clarity that you get from that, I do miss that clarity that you can only get from those experiences. Now where I'm at with my life and my business, my phone's on me all the time. And, so I've got to have really strict boundaries around that, which I sometimes don't. So, the peace that came with Vipassana is a peace I haven't had in other aspects of my life. So I do always suggest that people should go and try one at least once in their lifetime.
The two things that give me the most, I mean, there's, as you said, there's so many different ways in which you can heighten your awareness and bring clarity. But the two things by far that are most impactful for me when it comes to clarity is psychedelics and Vipassana. And I will always I won't nudge people into psychedelics, only if they feel called. But those two things are the most influential. Are you in a relationship?
No, I'm single now after a Vipassana.
Really?
I was married. I was with my ex-husband for 14 years, and not just after a Vipassana, but we had some things going on where we weren't able to have children together. We had quite a few miscarriages, and then they realized that we couldn't have kids. And then we went around the surrogacy route, and then our surrogate got an eye tumor, and so we couldn't do surrogacy. And then my mum was diagnosed with a really rare brain disease at the same time, and she's permanently brain damaged now. So this was all happening within a short time frame, just before Spinal Energetics was birthed. And so I actually think I created Spinal because I needed to have something come of that time, and Spinal was that. And that's probably why I look at it as so personally, as opposed to maybe some other, modality owners. I've found it hard to separate myself from the modality, which is something I'm working on now. But after my first Vipassana, I got some clarity around that I think was the answer I always knew. But just hearing it with such certainty after that was quite peaceful for me.
How long ago was that you and your partner split?
3 years ago now.
After 14 years together.
Yeah.
That's fucking wild. So I don't know how invested you are in the world of dating, but I can only assume, I would seriously struggle if I was back in that.
I am struggling, Blake. I'm not going to lie.
So this is it. I'm interested then. So what do you notice for you? Like, I can only imagine that the world of dating, even sexuality and sex has a very different component when you are as deeply immersed in energetic work as you are. So what have you noticed with that being at the forefront for you, the energetic component of how that influences and impacts the world of dating?
Yeah, it impacts a lot. I think there's things that I need to be met with that maybe other people don't have as high need to be met with. So for example, I need to be able to have quiet, deep conversations with someone and be emotionally and mentally stimulated by them, but then also be able to have a laugh at them. So the spectrum's quite large with the needs that I want from a partner. I want to be able to have really meaningful, connections and have conversations about, the most important things, and then also have a laugh. That's challenging. And then also what kind of that sexual experience means to me and what that requires for me to feel into that might be different to maybe the person. So yeah, I wouldn't say I have a huge pool of people to necessarily pick from. I don't care a lot about the other things, like whether they've got kids or whether they've, those kind of things don't faze me, or what their age is or whatever. I don't care. It's more about a spiritual connection, but then also grounded enough to be able to live in this practical world with me as well, but also open enough to the spiritual component so we can bring in that side as well. But I wouldn't say there's a huge pool of people. I don't know. That could be a limiting belief, but
I don't know about you.
Much going on, so
I would say it'd be interesting to see your experience. But having spent like 20 odd years in personal development, I've been really impressed with the growth of men doing the work in the last 5 years. So I would say the pool is increasing, but I can only assume, and working with a lot of people who are deep in the work, I guess the challenge that you have is that the pool gets smaller. It gets deeper when you do find the right people, but it definitely gets smaller from what I've seen.
It's definitely smaller. Yeah, definitely. Like, I'm 38 now, so it's a different pool. And the total dating game has changed. So the last time I had been single, I was 21 years old. So
that's why.
And then I came out and I was like, God, people don't even go out anymore. Like, it's all a thing. And then, I looked back on the partners I'd had in my life, and I wouldn't have swiped for any of them on just pure looks. That's not really what attracts me to someone, isn't their looks initially. I need attraction, but that usually comes from something else for me. So yeah, I can't say the apps have really worked in my favor in that way. And it also feels like, to have an actual conversation, like, it just feels forced. But then I don't leave my house, Blake. So I don't know where I'm expecting.
It'd be nice if they just rocked up to your door, like that would be cool. The perfect person just rocks up to your door.
That would be amazing. And then also timing's a thing. Some people have got other things going on in their life where they're not in the same time frame or place that you're in. So there's just there's a lot. But I think I'm I'm not the easiest person to ask out either from perception, I've been told, in terms of like my Instagram or whatever. People get a bit intimidated by that. And also that what I do for work may not be something that resonates with them either. You know, that might
what makes you so intimidating based on your socials?
I don't know. I've had that feedback. So
is it the ink on the arm?
Hope not.
Nah, I wouldn't have thought so. I think as a bloke, nah, it wouldn't be. I wouldn't think so.
20 something when I did that.
I love it. I reckon it's great.
I would wipe it off if I could.
I don't think it is. If I was to observe, and I have no idea, I've only kind of known of your work for like 6 weeks or whatever. Anthea Todd got me onto it.
Thanks, Anthea.
Yeah, legend. I would say what makes you intimidating is being deep in the work. And I think most blokes feel naturally inferior from a emotional point of view. Mm-hmm. And if you're looking at the emotional and energetic components, which is your mastery, my guess is that would be one of the more intimidating elements too. But I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to attract someone who can step into that. But that would be, I do think a lot of blokes feel intimidated and underdone in the world of personal development or emotional intelligence or even obviously the energetics. So that would be my guess. Does that sound like it could be a thing?
Once they start talking to me, I think that'd be fine. But I think it's this idea of seeing that there's something to it that maybe wouldn't be there if I had a different occupation, you know? So yeah, but my occupation also represents me. So I don't look at it as just a job. It's far more than that for me. It's part of my life and part of who I am. And the work represents me essentially as well. So, you know, everyone's like, oh, you work so much, but I don't really see it as that.
The same.
My life, it's part of my life, you know, and part of my expression of life currently. So, you know, that might change one day. And when it does, you know, that's okay too. But for now, this is where I'm meant to be and what I'm meant to be doing. And yeah, so yeah, I don't know. I think there's probably a lens that people need to look at themselves. Like, are they in that alignment in their own life? Have they got their life together in that way? And maybe that's also a bit of a threat at times as well.
Well, you're in a very fortunate position that not many are, that you love what you do. And I don't know, from what I'm hearing, I feel like there's some similarities in this piece. Do you ever wonder where the healthy expression and potentially the not so healthy expression of working and anti-social or social is? Like I those are two things that I still sit with. And like you, I fucking live and breathe my work. And I've seen ways in which I would avoid connection, even though it's the thing that I want the most, unconsciously through using work or other means. Have you sat with that?
Yeah, look, I know that in my space, I'm in control as well, which is something that makes me feel safe as an individual, because a lot of the things that have occurred in my life have been not in my control, have been really challenging times. You know, there's also been things not in my control that have been really beautiful, but your brain's not wired for that. It remembers the things that have been, you know, bad that happened. So for me, I have a lot of control because it's my space and it's my work and people come to me and then I get to facilitate the environment, what's said, what isn't said, you know, so there's a lot of safety in that for me, I think. So I don't have much anxiety around that because it's my world within the world. It's literally very comfortable for me, but it took a lot of work to create that world within the world, mind you. But then when I have to do a task socially, for example, that's in the actual world, that can be more of a challenge. Like I get anxious going to like airports or, you know, having to call like Medicare or something like that would be really overwhelming for me, like bureaucracy, governing things and, you know, no, things have to be done this way. Like my brain doesn't really work that way. So I find more things like that a stressor than going to work where everything makes a lot more sense for me.
I resonate with some of what you just said then. So with the out of control piece, I don't know how much you've explored around kind of masculine and feminine, but how do you go in terms of surrendering into the feminine if this control piece is quite a strong grip of yours?
Yeah, look, I think number one, being aware of it is important and knowing why it's there. I haven't always been a controlling person, and there's a reason why that has started to come more into play in my life because, yeah, things have occurred in my 30s that hadn't occurred in my 20s, that somehow my unconscious has decided that we feel safer in that way. But I also still push myself outside of that safe zone, and not necessarily in the world in those social ways, because that's still not really enough of an important want for me yet, or a need, I should say. But there's definitely other things that feel uncomfortable that I will do, because growth is such an important value of mine. So the growth value is always more important to me than the in control and the safe value. So as long as that's the case, I think I'll continue to still grow and expand, but not comfortably. But I'm still willing to stretch myself and not just be stretched by my environment. But again, if I really delve into that, I think there's still a bit of subtlety around control. Like if I just stretch myself and constantly go out of my comfort zone, that's still me having some kind of control around the discomfort. So that's kind of where I'm sitting with it at the moment.
Where do you stand with the piece around what is a healthy push beyond your, because this is your work, so I'm fascinated to see what you've got to say. The piece around pushing beyond your boundaries, which, the world of personal development, it speaks about this every single day. But then the body's intelligence that if it's not allowing you for whatever reason to push beyond, it's trying to tell you something. So I'll give you an example. I think on a much deeper level, I have a struggle to let go. And that has shown up when I've done breath work, where I just pass out. I can't kind of let go. It's happened in Cambo, where everyone around me is vomiting and I fucking passed out. I couldn't even vomit. It happened with saltwater purges, where everyone can vomit it up and I just held it. Like and I'm looking at that going, I'm having a crack. But there's a, to me, it appears to be some kind of intelligence within my body that's like, mate, you're not good to let go. Yeah. And this is well beyond the conscious mind, because I'm now using plant medicine and everything that, kind of breaks that down. So I'm like, fuck, this motherfucker's hold on real strong. So how do you dance with the body's intelligence of it doesn't want you to go there and let's push? And it might be quite a hard, it might be how long's a piece of string question, but.
I was about to say the exact same thing. It is how long's a piece of string question. It's also a person by person, experience by experience basis. So probably the hardest part for my practitioners when they come out is knowing when to push and knowing when to pull back and knowing when to sit with something, because that's a tricky thing to decipher, But in your experiences of what you're talking about with those specific examples, they're all unconscious behaviors. So they're all the body unconsciously wanting to protect it from releasing whatever at that point in time. And for me, when you're using things like Cambo and things like that, and you're at that point, then the external is still being utilized to try and bring something from the internal up. And if the internal is still saying no, then I honor that internal. And it doesn't mean that you consciously aren't wanting to let go, and I think that's what's so challenging when people even come and do my work. For example, if they don't move for the first session, they're like, but I really wanted to come and I really wanted to release. I'm really open-minded and I wanted this experience. But again, there's this attachment to what the experience is supposed to be. Like, I'm supposed to do that. That's what this experience equals. And then there's kind of a disenchantment when you don't have that experience that you decided is the experience, rather than the actual experience itself and the reality of your experience. The experience you're having is the experience you're meant to have. Like, there was no point giving you more and more Cambo, for example, to try and keep pushing when that was the appropriate dosage for the context of where you're at in that point in time. So as long as the context and that's appropriate and you're being pushed to a certain limit, but that's still within, a framework that's safe, then you're kind of coming up against the two worlds of stability versus mobility, and which one do you rely on first? But for you, those experiences, I would say the unconscious is not wanting to let go, not that you're not wanting to yet. And that strong mechanism within you is in there very strongly for whatever reason. And you've got to, instead of wanting to change that, you've got to honor that that's where the body's at this point in time.
What do you do personally to maintain emotional hygiene? Because you, as a person quite attuned to energetics and emotions, and I see this more with Shani. I don't know what she has that I don't, but essentially she picks up shit everywhere we go. And I feel like I either am picking it up and I'm not aware of it, or I'm just not picking it up. Do you have like daily practices that you're doing to kind of keep your emotional hygiene? Not a thing?
The reason I don't is because my belief system, and again, this is my belief system. My belief system is that whatever is within you is within me. So I don't think there's any bad energy that I could get from you. And what I mean by that, let's say you've got a lot of anger in you, just for example. I'm not saying you do, but
do I look angry to you?
Let's just say you do. And then brings something up in me that creates anger within me. I think it creates separateness if I think of it like, oh, well, you've got that anger and I don't want it to kind of come near me. I actually embrace your anger and reflect on how that part of me also exists. The darkness within you is the darkness within me, and vice versa. And there's light and dark and duality.
So you don't bypass. You're not a bypasser is what you're saying.
And I think what I love about Spinal is that we really speak on that. We really create unity and non-separateness with that, because a lot of energy workers prior have used words like, oh, you're blocked in like your sacral chakra or whatever. And that's no use to you because you're not consciously blocking anything. And it makes you feel bad. It makes you feel like your energy did something bad, when actually, if there is a disconnection within the sacral chakra, for example, the body's done the right thing. There's something that's occurred that's created that disconnection. But how can we create the safety and the trust within the body for it to realize it no longer needs to protect and to then connect back? That's what we're working with. And it's the innate intelligence and the energetic field that does that, rather than using language that's kind of disempowering to people and making them feel worse for something that they can't necessarily control consciously,
I think the best example of this, if we're talking general relationships and maybe a male-female dynamic, and I've had it so many times in previous relationships, is like, hey, you need to open your heart up more. Sweetheart, if I had the fucking key, I would happily just open my heart up more. Like, it's the most unhelpful thing you could possibly say. But yeah.
Just let
I don't know any blokes who, if they didn't have the fucking key to unlock their heart, wouldn't take the key and just unlock it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not helpful at all.
No, well, it's when we don't have the understanding of that, actually just sit with someone in that and not want to change it. They're uncomfortable with the fact that you're not opening to the level that they want you to open. And so that's essentially a projection as well, and wanting something consciously is not enough for it to change. And that's why unconscious work is so important. And that's why things like Spinal are really, gathering momentum at the moment within our communities, at least, because we're aware that the unconscious is so important, because the want to change isn't enough. It's just not. We can be aware of a lot of things that we need to change, but there's something going on under that awareness that we don't necessarily have that control over that we think we do. We're still got that reptilian brain. We've still got that limbic system. They've been there for years to protect us, and they've developed for reasons, and they're unconscious also for a reason. But it's also why unconscious energy work is something that's coming to the forefront in my belief system.
I can only assume a big part of the skills that are required with the people that you work with in terms of teaching this skill is their ability to ground themselves when there's a lot of energy going on. Is that something that you actively put in your teaching, or is that more something that they go off and kind of teach themselves and get better at becoming unwavering in the movement of the energy?
Everyone's kind of at different levels with that when they come in. So certain people get different communication around that than others. Probably the ones that find it the most challenging, there's two spectrums. There's the ones that feel it, but then they allow it to move through them, and they're actually taking on the session rather than facilitating the session. So it's learning for those people how to let it move through you like water, but not trying to stop it or take over it just through your own experience. So there's certain things we teach around that, but we have really, really good community mentoring after the course, which I found was more important than during. The other end is the people who can't feel anything, and to get them to keep doing things and keep being motivated, because it's a really hard skill. We're very highly specific in how we teach this modality. So it's almost like a balance between the mental and the knowing of the innate working at the same time. So it's like intuitive, but still highly mental. So you're almost having to pat your head and rub your stomach at the same time. And so it's having that duality. That's a skill that takes time as well. But yeah, look, everyone's kind of at a different stage. And some people, for them, their capacity is different to others. So some people won't see more than 2 a day ever doing this work. And that's okay. Other people have hour sessions because that's how they like to work. Other people have half an hour sessions. We're quite flexible around that still, because we're not a purist technique. And what I mean by that is we don't think we're the only tool that works or that's going to save the day in the world. We believe that we're an additional tool that can help many people, but we're not the only tool.
You would have done, I can only assume, a lot of work around being able to move that energy through your body or ground yourself. What was the last thing that rattled you because you'd see a lot of, I can only assume, see a lot of big energy in the work that you do. And for that reason, I'm sure you're quite well grounded at that process. But what was the last thing that we like, fuck, that got me good?
I got concussed at the start of the year. So
that'll do it. That'll get you.
I had someone have a release in a group event and they were just started spasming, which isn't uncommon. That doesn't make me feel any sort of way. But what had happened is I had placed my hands under her. And so she kicked me and I hit the concrete head first. It got a huge concussion and some brain swelling and things as a result of that concussion. So for me, probably just being aware of all times of being able to read how quickly someone's body can, release and be a little bit not as complacent, because you get to a point where you can kind of predict where it's happening. And I just moved too slow, even though I knew that that's what was going to happen. And I knew as soon as that, I'm like, she's going to knock me out, but there was nothing I could do. So I'm not as complacent in events anymore. I move a little bit quicker than what I used to, but it is, every session with every single person is different every single time. So that's why I love it, because you're constantly learning. But then again, it can be frustrating for a lot of people that want to completely master something and have a brain like A plus B equals C, because we can't give you a perfect formula with this work, because there isn't one, so that can be frustrating from some practitioners' point of view, but it's what I love about it.
I found that in the work of psychedelics as well. Like if I ever think I'm going to predict what's going to play out, I'm always fucking blindsided and learn something every single session that just helps me navigate things better every time.
Well, that's actually a huge benefit. So they've done studies now where if you can expect the change and that change occurs, hardly any brain activity happens. Whereas if you can't expect it, no matter what, and anything happens, your brain starts to fire off a lot more. So you don't actually want to be able to expect what's going to happen in a session. That's actually part of why the work is so powerful, because you can't. So the brain can't get used to it. So it's always novel, like something new is happening every time, and not so much that it's overwhelming. There's enough predictability there to keep it safe, but always enough unexpected to get a change.
My friend, your work is fascinating. And yeah, while that we've been 1 degree separation for so long, but I only kind of came across it kind of 6 or 7 weeks ago, but I'm loving it. Do you do, just for people that are listening, do you do any one-on-one stuff, or is it mainly the kind of practitioner stuff now?
I used to, I don't anymore. So I hadn't taken new clients around 4 years now. So I've got my clients from when I first started, and it was like $39, 7 years ago,
so good,
to get someone to try this work. So I'm really proud that they've been with me a really long time. So now I predominantly teach, and I just do the hours I need to do as a chiropractor in clinic to keep my registration and things like that, and to tick those boxes. But no, I do events to help out every so often, so I can always pop my head in and still be part of the community. But for now, it's predominantly teaching, because there's a lot more people out there we could have had and trained, but I didn't want to. I want to keep the integrity of the work. So we've got around 500 practitioners, but we've turned away a lot as well. So right now, every practitioner that's out there is being taught personally by me, which is important, but that will probably eventually change as well. So I just go where the priority takes me, and at the moment it's teaching.
So good. And for people that want to find out more about you and the work that you do, where's the best spot to send them?
The best spot to send them is my Instagram is Dr. Sarah Jane Chiro, if you want to follow me more as a person, whereas at Spinal Energetics is our Instagram for the modality itself. They do kind of blend. As I said, it's hard to differentiate between me and the work, but we're getting a little bit better at that now. So you'll see that. And our website for Spinal Energetics has all the course and practitioner info that you need. So we've got around 500 around the world, and we also do online sessions as well. So there's no one anywhere in the world that couldn't have access to this work, which is huge for me.
And as we've both said at different points, it's, I think, work that you've got to try. It's so hard to find language for until you try it. And then once you try it, you get it, and your world will change.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try. I used to have like a 60-second elevator pitch around it at some point, because everyone's like, you need to be able to describe what you do. And so, but basically what we're doing, we're working with your innate intelligence and your nervous system and helping it feel safe, basically.
And it's fucking magic and cool and worth trying out.
Yes, definitely.
Legend. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Blake.